I think this is the area where leaders often make the most mistakes, failing to plan, so planning to fail.
How do you design an executive role? How do you kind of think through that pre-search process before you start hiring?
The first one is pretty obvious, which is the job description, but I always say you need to write it from scratch. The second element in the plan is what I call hunting grounds, where you are articulating what sort of experiences do you want this candidate to have had before.
Do you have any tactics on how you make senior hires successful?
I think a mistake that I see execs make is they come in too hard and too fast. The first piece of advice I give is like, let's agree a period of time where all I'm asking from you is listening and learning.
Welcome to How I Hire, the podcast where we talk with senior go-to-market leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow new talent. This is brought to you by Whispered, the network where executives land unposted go-to-market roles and accelerate their career. Your next role won't be posted, it'll be whispered. Today, I'm joined by Robin Bordoli. Robin is the CEO and CMO at Weights & Biases. He has all of revenue. That Weights & Biases is the AI developer platform to train models and develop agents. We've actually been exploring it a little bit with Whispered as well, too, as we build out our AI. Robin is an engineer turned go-to-market leader. Early in his career, he held senior leadership roles at Marketo and Jive, both at IPO. He's also been CEO at Nextroll and Figure. Robin, welcome. It's great to see you.
Andy, it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
We're going to have fun. We were riffing a little bit beforehand, so I'm excited for this. Robin, you've seen all aspects of go-to-market. You've managed all of them. Which do you think is the hardest to hire for?
Oh, great question, Andy, to kick us off. I think I'll probably have to give two examples, not one. And they're both roles that I've sort of hired in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So seeing how these roles are changing. The first would be a sort of VP of field engineering. And the reason that is hard, you're looking for a combination of sort of rare skills in one individual, which is deep technical acumen in the field that you're selling into, and then couple that with commercial savvy, right? And people tend to spike one or the other. And so finding that balance and that intersection, and someone that understands sort of, what it is to bring those two skill sets to bear and then build that organization in their image. So that's probably the first one. The second one I think is a VP of product marketing. And I think that one is hard, both because the role is hard as well, but I think it's probably product marketing is one of the functions that is least well understood by other functions, right? People sometimes think of it as like the poor relation of product management, right? Like it's downstream from product management and just sort of take the output from product management, or they just think of it as, well, you're just articulating what the features are and you're just selling those features, but it's so much more than that. So I think those are two roles that I think are hard to get right.
I agree with you on both. Maybe I'd love to double click a little bit on the VP of Field Eng one. I've lived in a world where we've had a powerful version of that too. I think it's called lots of different things, right? We at Boxby called it professional services. I've seen Salesforce call it like sales engineering. I've seen you call it field engineering. Other people, I think maybe this is in the same realm of forward deployed engineer right now. Like what's the problem that field engineering solves for you, and how have you kind of seen that being successful?
Yeah, the way we think about field engineering, it's the function that is responsible for the technical success of our customers. And the Weights & Biases field engineering org today has 4 distinct roles within it, right? Wow. It has solution architects that are really about how do we help customers initially stand up their instances, because we actually deploy multi-tenant, dedicated, and sort of self-hosted. And so that's a very deep, you've got to know about Kubernetes, you've got to be sort of deep into infrastructure. That's a very sort of defined role of how do I stand up instances. But then we have what we call ACEs, which is AI solution engineers, and we split those into pre-sales and post-sales. So, our product is a code-first product. It's not a UI-first product. And so the ability to demo the product, the ability to show it in multiple use cases and in a workflow. So we have as we're trying to win customers, they're oriented one way. And then once we've closed customers, responsible for the technical success of those customers. And then the fourth role is, flavor of the month, right? Forward deploy engineers, right? FDEs, where we actually, we have a product called Weave, which is our second product that we actually, that's the product that AI teams use to develop and evaluate and monitor AI agents through the entire life cycle. So from development into production. And so this idea that we would sell Weave and then actually give you a forward deployed engineer that joins your team and actually helps you build the agent, right? That one is that you're not owning a book of business, a set of customers. You're like SEAL Team 6, right? You're coming in, I'm here for 6 weeks. I'm going to get you up and running, and I'm going to show you by doing, not by saying, and then I'm going to move on.
I think it's important, like you have all revenue, which is so powerful for me, right? Like the ability to have this field eng team engage people and then make sure that they go all the way through success, as you kind of described at the beginning. Like it's not to close the sale, it's to make sure the customer's long-term successful.
Exactly. We've got to align, from our perspective, there's a land, right? So winning new customers, then there's renewals and expansion. So how do you get them to use more of what they're already using? And then there's cross-sell, right? How do you get them to use the second and the third and the fourth product as well? So yeah, having one revenue org that's thinking about all of those motions, I think is critical. Otherwise, you make suboptimal decisions.
I couldn't agree more. We could probably go deep into that one and we'll talk more about like the deciders of different things, but I'm a believer in that. We were talking before we hopped on or before we hit record around how do you design an executive role? How do you kind of think through that pre-search process before you start hiring? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the area where leaders often make the most mistakes, right? They're sort of failing to plan, so planning to fail, to slightly misquote Benjamin Franklin. But so I actually have a very strong opinion on this of the right way to do the pre-work, so to speak, before you even get to, meeting candidates. And so in my mind, there's always sort of 5 elements that I think are necessary in a plan before you start meeting candidates, right? The first one is pretty obvious, which is the job description. But I always say you need to write it from scratch, right? Don't go take a boilerplate and just sort of tweak it.
Don't use ChatGPT to write your...
Yeah, go write a version. Sure, use ChatGPT to like critique it and provide suggestions and ask, where do you think it can improve? But go do the work, right? Write a job description that would have attracted you a few years ago, right? That would make you pique your interest and say, I want to go learn about that. I want to go, I want to go spend some time on that, right? So that would be the first element. The second element in the plan is what I call hunting grounds, where you are articulating what sort of experiences do you want this candidate to have had before, right? So in Weights and Biases world, we're a developer tool. So we really want people to have come, right, from other developer tools sort of arenas, right? It might be more traditional software, right? And not necessarily AI and ML, but go and be clear, like what are the hunting grounds, right? Sometimes data analytics is a sort of a good arena for us, but be really clear on the hunting grounds, especially because, I would typically use an external sort of search firm. You need to articulate that, where to go look, right? The third element then is sample profiles, right? Go do the work yourself and go find 5 profiles, a minimum of 5 profiles that you think are a fit to the job description. And also you could rank those profiles against the job description. If it's just yes, no binary, you haven't written the job description tightly enough, right? The job description needs to help you force rank candidates, not just say, are they in or are they out, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yep.
The fourth thing is being really clear on the interview process, right? Who's interviewing when and what the total time is that you think a candidate that would get all the way to an offer is looking to invest, right? So I always have, and we'll get into that bit, but right, I have 3 roles in the interview process. So I have decider, right, which is you as the hiring manager, but being explicit that there's one person deciding, right? Then you have inputs, so people who you believe you've calibrated and you think, you know what, they are a good judge of talent. They understand this role. I value their input, right? And then what I call socializers. So this might be people where you want them to be aware, right, of the candidate coming in and the role and what this remit's going to be. It might be someone that's reporting to this individual, right? So the socialization aspect, but they're not an actual input into the hiring decision, right? And then the last bit, which may be the most controversial of the lot, is a take-home exercise. I always create a take-home exercise for execs, which I think has probably changed over the last couple of years. Like in a world where, there were more jobs than candidates, it was like, well, pound sand, I'm not going to do that, right? But I think the world has changed in the last, 2-3 years.
Yes.
And so, for field engineering, we sort of prepped, the take-home exercise there was, prep a demo to this sort of prospect, come give us the demo. And then the other is, role play. Okay, imagine you're actually giving feedback to product about where you would improve, the product, right? So whether it's for VP of product marketing, VP of field eng, VP of revenue marketing, demand gen, take the time to go write a take-home exercise that is going to show to you how they think, how they communicate, how they synthesize as well. So those 5 components to me they're non-negotiable. You've got to have them before you start looking at candidates.
I love it. I mean, so many, whether they're in-house or external recruiters, you are their best dream, right? Because so many people are like, show me some candidates, I'll figure it out on the fly. And I've dealt with a lot of those people. So I love how structured you are. I'd love to dive into 2 of them in particular. One is the JD.
Yeah.
Are you writing that as a marketing document or as an evaluation document? Because I find the 2 can oftentimes be very different.
I actually try and make it one and the same, right? Because I'll give an example, right, of what I mean by sort of specificity, right? So I'll take one of the roles I had for recently, which is a sort of VP of revenue marketing, right? Demand gen, right? So I was very explicitly looking for experience at a certain program spend, right? At a certain pipeline creation level and at a certain team size, right? So don't just say, I'm looking for 5 years of experience or something, which is sort of generically what you often see. Is like, be concrete about what are the things you're going to evaluate on, right? And so, for, product marketing, it might be, okay, I want you to have launched a product and that product to have generated, X million, of ARR, right? So it might be staged, right? I want I want the candidate to have, experienced the 10 million to 100 million, ARR sort of growth stage, right? Because I think the more you can demonstrate to candidates really clear what you're looking for, the more they're going to be attracted, right? I'm not going to waste time in the process. So I tend to, with the way I write them, I think they can be both, right? They are both, okay, it's attractive because they're really clear what they're looking for, but it's also a mechanism by which we evaluate and sort of calibrate, candidates as well. And look, it's not unusual that after you do the first iteration and you look at sample profiles, you go, you know what? I haven't quite articulated that tightly enough. I need to go update the JD, to reflect, right? It's teased out something that is a little bit more important than I thought initially, right? In my thought process.
Makes sense. What, maybe going to your hunting grounds, one, and kind of taking what you just said now, how often do you find that you compromise, maybe in a positive way, those criteria, right? Do you get surprised by a candidate, or are you more of the mind of, I just don't want to see somebody that doesn't meet those criteria? Because it's obviously a very narrow window, and sometimes you'll find a candidate that'll flex on one dimension versus another. And either you say, hey, we'll adjust the scope for you, or actually you'd be great over here instead. So how often do you flex on those fairly well thought through criteria?
Yeah, I'm willing to have some level of flexibility, and I'll normally try and articulate like non-negotiables and negotiables, like, take the ARR state, like, okay, I want someone that's gone from 10 million to 100 million, experience that stage of growth, right? You know what? But do you value the 10 to 50 more than the 50 to 100, right? So, and the reason I'm willing to flex a little bit is because I actually think the take-home exercise is a real indicator of executive sort of ability, right? Because what that's testing is the ability to, ingest vast amounts of new information, the ability to synthesize, the ability to prioritize, the ability to communicate. And so yeah, I am willing to sort of flex. It's not completely binary on the criteria. But I tend to think of it as a little bit of a portfolio, right? If I've got 10 candidates in flight, maybe I'll flex on a couple, right? And, to just make sure I'm not overfitting, right, on the criteria.
That's good. Do you have any, you don't have to name the specific first, but any examples where somebody did come a little bit out of left field or you put them through the process and they blew you away?
Yeah, I think so, right? I'll be, for example, I'll I won't name her, but like if people really want to do the research, they could work it out. But the individual I hired to be sort of VP of product marketing at Weights and Biases didn't really have startup experience, right? So I flexed on that dimension, right? Deep domain experience, right? Incredible reference check, did a great job on the take-home exercise. And so still very senior and polished, but like I was, okay, this person's operated more in big companies. I'm going to take that is a little bit of a leap of faith, right?
I agree. Sometimes people maybe like they've never seen a world without enablement, or they've never seen a world without this type of infrastructure on that.
Exactly. Side. Right. And so that's one where like I flexed and it was the right decision, right? We optimized for domain knowledge and then a belief that could operate at startup speed, right? And very pleased that I did.
Love that. Okay, take home. You mentioned the world's changed. I agree. It's definitely a hiring market right now. So you can get the candidates to do it, but there's also this thing of when they take it home, they use AI. Just like every kid's using AI to cheat right now. And so how do you design a take home that is AI proofable? Or is it one where it's more about how they present it when they're in person with you? How do you think about that take home?
It's more the latter, and I'll go through the sort of the three different examples, right? I sort of mentioned the field engineering one. So that one, that's a little bit more AI proof because it's sort of, okay, go prep for 2 demos, but they're 2 different scenarios, right? One scenario is you're demoing to this prospect in this context, right? And then the other scenario, you're giving feedback back to the product team based on your experience of the product and what worked, what didn't, what was confusing, etc. So that one's a little bit more proof. But let me take the other examples.
So it's not here's a deck that I've done all the work with. I've done the study, but I'm on the hot seat when I'm in the room.
And it's so the other two, like, so for VP of revenue marketing, demand gen, right? The take home exercise was you sort of give them a scenario where they're basically doing annual planning, right? And you give them enough, but it's relatively open-ended, right? Okay, here's the budget, right? Here are the geographies you're in. Here's the size of the sales team, right? Here's some, broad parameters, which are roughly in line with our business, right? But not, completely 100% accurate, but close enough. And then you're asking them to sort of, it's a little bit of an open-ended question. So, okay, how would you organize your team and how would you organize the budget? And so there isn't really like one definitive answer, right? It's an open-ended question, and then you're looking for how do they organize their thoughts? How can they understand trade-offs? How can they communicate it clearly? So that it's somewhat open-ended. And then the VP of product marketing take-home exercise, that was a sales positioning exercise, right? Where we gave them 3 scenarios. And the scenario is, okay, an A is about to get on a sales call with this scenario, with this context, and they've come to you 10 minutes before the call, right? Here are the 3 questions they ask. How would you answer them, right? And again, it's more about, what information have they found? How are they structuring? How are they synthesizing? And then it's always the exercise. We give the guidance. It's normally a 1-pager. It's not bigger than that. You could spend a infinite amount of time on this, but you probably want to spend between 1 and 3 hours, right, for prep. And then you're going to come back and then we're going to have a live conversation, right? So that you decide, is it a Google Doc you write up? Is it a presentation, right? Is it just a live conversation that you want to lead us through? You decide, right? But 1 to 3 hours of prep and then 1 hour live conversation.
I love that. When we hired our head of enablement at Carta, I basically gave her 5 gong calls and said, listen to these. And at that point, when you see what comes back, you know if they know their craft or not.
Yes,
And I think
exactly.
that's what I'm assessing for.
Yeah.
Okay, so some point earlier you talked about external recruiters that sounds like you use them a decent amount. Given how well you prep, I'm curious because it's like you're handing them a lot of the work that they ideally want to do. In what circumstances and at what levels do you find you use external recruiters versus your in-house team, and how do you think?
I always have a preference for external, right? And I've had good success there. And I think for sort of two reasons, right? I think the first is that the best candidates are by and large are passive. And these are the elite headhunters are the ones that are sort of just, they're always staying in touch with strong candidates, right? So I think for my mind, they're an avenue to passive candidates, right? But tend to be the best candidates. And then the second thing is, I think it's also quite helpful for the candidate to almost have this like arm's length sort of guide through the process, right? So that they feel there's, that headhunter at some level is the candidate's, advisor and can play a role. And I think sometimes that can be helpful as well as they're trying to come to a very sort of considered decision. But what I don't do is outsource the process, right? So I really think it's a mistake to outsource the process, because at the end of the day, you're hiring this individual, you're building a very deep bond with this individual. You're going to win together and you're going to lose together, and you can't outsource that, right? So it's not to outsource the process, it's to find really high quality candidates that are passive, that fit what you're looking for. And it's then to be this sort of trusted other guide throughout the process that'll sometimes feed you little bits of information like, hey, just discovered they're actually seem to be accelerating on another process, right? Or giving you a little sort of guidance about timing or inclination or orientation. That doesn't have to be a lot, but sometimes it's just really, really helpful to the candidate and to you.
I like that the trusted advisor part is a reason I've never heard anybody verbalize before why they hire somebody, but it actually makes sense. There's this interesting role that they play. They can actually hear candidates may be more vulnerable with them than they will be with internal recruiters. I think, because you're right, it's also like there is some stuff that they're going to capture in this middle ground, and they probably do get seen there. I think we've got a whole playbook on how as executive to work with a recruiter. It's really important to know what you can share, what you can't share. There's always that question after interview. So how'd it go? You just met Robin. Like, how did it go? And so that's a really interesting one that you have to know how to play well too.
And I think there's another bit, which it's maybe a finer point than the first one, which is they have access to passive talent, right? They've also got a pretty good sense of the market for a particular candidate in a particular field, right? It's like, okay, you know what? There's hundreds that could fit that. Or you know what? There's maybe only 5 people that sort of fit that as well. So they're going to give you a sense of the market as well, which I think is also helpful, because that plays a lot into then how I run the process, right, in the actual interviewing stage, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I'd love to deep dive into the best candidates are passive.
Yeah.
I think on the overall margin, yes, there's a lot of active candidates that are desperate, and you'd almost have to remove those. But tell me more of why you believe the best candidates are passive, removing all the active, unqualified candidates from the mix.
I think there's sort of 2 reasons for that, right? I think the moment we're in right now feels like a very, singular moment in sort of the technology industry, right? Where we're going through this massive shift, right? And I don't think it's anything like we have experienced previously, right? Meaning it's not like cloud, it's not like mobile, it's not like social, right? It's more like when the world got electricity, right? And the societal shift, right? How much it changed where people lived, right? How they traveled, right? The work that they did, right? How they viewed the world, right? And so I think by and large, right, talent wants to be in market, not like sitting on the sides, sort of taking a break, right? Just sort of looking. So I think that's one reason. And then I also think the best talent tends to sort of, manage their terms, right? They're like, okay, if I'm truly great, I can sort of dictate when I leave an organization, meaning I've mentally decided I'm sort of going to exit this organization, but I'm going to do it in a professional and measured way. So I'm sort of, I'm on a 6-month, transition out, and I'm going to leave in a very graceful way, right? And, my team's going to be intact, and it's not suddenly 2 weeks notice and I'm out the door. So I think that is quite sort of common as well. And that's another reason why the best talents they have sort of smooth exits from organizations, right? I think those are the two primary reasons from my perspective. Again, that's not to say I will happily look at candidates that are, active as well, but I would bet, if I'm looking at 10, it might be more like 6 to 7 passive, 2 to 3 or 4 sort of active. It's gonna balance towards passive candidates.
I like that. It's a very well-reasoned, thoughtful approach. I think the challenge I do see with some people is good candidates that make, through the fault of their own, i.e. they punch themselves in the face or they got punched in the face with a bad CEO selection or a bad leader. Yeah. And those ones I just really feel for, right? Because
look, I've been an active candidate as well myself, right? So I've been active, I've been passive, right? I sort of see both sides of it. But yeah, again, when I come to the portfolio approach, it's probably 2/3, 1/3 passive versus active, right?
I love that. Anything people can do to break through to get to you? Anything that you've seen in the past where they, it's like if you had a role, somebody knows they have a role, like, has anybody ever broken through? Or given that you're not posting and you're using external recruiters, often maybe that's a lot harder, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, the short answer is no, right? It's either someone that I know in my network and I've actively reached out, right? I mean, there have been folks that have come through my network, right? So folks will, folks in my network will quite often, Robin's looking for a VP of field ends, right? And so that's really the only time that candidates have sort of broken through, where it's a trusted referral. And I will give, 3-5 people in my network that I think may have visibility into the sort of talent pools I'm trying to access. But it's rarer than you think, right?
I agree. I think the challenge we see a lot of these times is people are like, oh, it's VP of Eng. I've been VP of Eng at a completely unrelated company at a different size.
Right. And it's like,
then I should apply for this role. And then that unfortunately gets everyone's guards up. And I think this one click applying and all this stuff has really made it so people do the unposted or the whispered roles. Well, let's shift over to interview process, Robin. I know you and I were talking a lot about that. I think we have a very similar view on like the decider concept, but why don't you walk through like how you think about the roles in an interview process?
Yeah. So let me first of all talk about, the full sort of end-to-end process. In my mind, there's 3 rounds, right, in an interview process, right? And each one of them has got like an A and a B, right? So round 1 is entirely with me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
First round, I always have a full hour with a candidate. It's never less than an hour because it needs to go both broad and deep. And then I always leave that one with, okay, the goal of that first meeting is for the candidate and I to each answer the question, do we want to continue the conversation? It's the only goal, right? And be explicit up front that that's the goal. And then the second part of round 1 is another time, another chunk of time with me, right? Go away and think about, do you want to continue the conversation, right? So that's sort of round 1, and that's typically 2 hours of investment, right, from the candidate's perspective, right? Round 2 then is really the critical sort of decision-making round where my inputs, right? So that might be 3 or 4 folks that I trust and I'm calibrated on the ability to evaluate this role. And so that might be another 3 hours, right? 3-4 hours. And again, I'm getting their sort of feedback. So that's sort of round 2A. And then 2B is the take-home exercise, right? You take the exercise, you go do 1 to 3 hours, and then you're going to come back in, you're going to meet with me as the decider and then the inputs, right? So you're going to have a live group discussion on that, right? And then for me, that's the decision-making. At that point, right, you're sort of moving to offer, right? But if you think about the time that a candidate's now invested, right, they've invested 9 hours or so, right, to get to that point. So I am giving the candidate guidance up front, right, after the act, like, do you want to continue the conversation? Do you want to move forward? I'm sort of giving them guidance. Look, to get to an offer is this sort of level of investment. So, if you're not willing to make that investment, you probably shouldn't take the next step, right?
I think that's a really good way to say it and to articulate it, and also to know how long the process is. I think a lot of candidates, maybe the recruiter says them, but it sounds like you actually may communicate that in your get to know you.
I think it's just really critical. That's what I mean by owning the process is, right, understand, like, everyone's scarcest resource is time. So be respectful from the candidate's perspective, be respectful for the people that are participating, your inputs, right, that are participating in this, right? So that's the sort of and then the third round is what I call socializers, right? The 3A is socializers. So this is the point where the candidate knows you're moving to offer and you go, hey, look, we've got everything we need to make a decision. You might want a few other inputs, right? So, so you may want to meet members of the team that you're going to managing, right? Or there may be a critical, I'm VP of Field Eng. I actually want to meet, VP of Product, right? Who wasn't one of the inputs, right? There may be some other, because you're asking, have you got all the information you need to be ready to make a decision? I don't want to put an offer in front of you if you're not yet at that point, right? And then the 3B then is me actually giving the offer, right? And sort of, going through the close, right? So that's the structure sort of all the way through. And then I think some of the other interesting questions are, how many when do you make a decision, right? Because in a perfect world, you want all candidates to parallel process and then you get to pick. That's not the way the world works.
That's
right?
universal for me. Yeah.
It's sequential. And, the nerd in me, says, well, this is actually a well understood set of problems that there's a mathematical answer to. This is called optimal stopping theory, right? That you're probably familiar with, right? Which is this idea of, it's the same way when you're trying to pick a mate or a spouse, right? It's like, okay, what that says is work out how many qualified candidates you think you could meet in the period of time that you want to make the decision, right? And if you think about, unless you know what process you're going through and the time investment and what the market is, you can't really answer that question. But let's say the answer is 10, right? I think in the next 8 weeks, I could meet 10 qualified candidates, right? What optimal stopping theory says, well, the optimal strategy then is it's actually 1 over the natural logarithm, right? So it literally say like 37% of the total you're going to meet with those and then work out who's the best out of that first batch and then continue and then pick the next best that's better than the best in that first batch, right? And so now broadly, so if I think it's a really hard role and I think, maybe I'm going to only meet 6 candidates, then that's sort of meet 2, calibrate there, and then, make a decision on the next best one. Now, I'm not so, dogmatic about this, but I think it's a useful heuristic to think about when is the right time to make a decision in the process on a candidate, because you're not making a decision in isolation. You're making it relative to the field of candidates that you could meet.
I like that. It's so well thought through, and it's a lot. The more structured the interview, the better it is for both sides. On the socializer one, I love the thing of we have everything we need. What more information can we give you? Are there ever times when they ask for stuff which reflects badly on them, right? So maybe somebody doesn't have the maturity to know the sensitivities around a board, or Robin, I want to meet your boss, or anything like that. Are there bad questions people can ask at that point in time?
There are, right? Which is why I always frame it as saying, hey, we're moving towards making a decision, right? Are there other things? I never actually say we've made a decision, right? So I always say we're moving towards making a decision. And it's possible that someone could expose naivete or poor judgment. And so, yeah, it is actually possible that candidates are falling out at that round, right? And they do something, right, that is not appropriate. Like, it could be, look, the socializers, I'm really clear, look, if it comes back and every member of that team, right, has had an allergic reaction, you sort of got to listen to that, right? Even if they're not formally input, right? But Yeah, I can think of one example where a candidate, I was sort of getting ready to move towards an offer, and they demonstrated a combination of naivety and bad judgment about um, how equity works, what's appropriate, how a board operates, right? And so it just sort of stopped me in my tracks. And, there were other candidates in flight. So it wasn't, we weren't literally at the paper stage, right? But we were definitely moving towards an offer. And that, it is important to listen to those signals.
I agree. I always train people like when you ask to meet a board, you really better be interviewing for a C-level position to be able to have that. And the board is a relationship that the CEO guards very well. And if you're like, can I meet 3 board members? And then you ask, all of a sudden you're like, oh, is this person just going to go around me all the time? I think there's a lot of those, knowing how it works, and it's sometimes I love to ask those open-ended questions and see where they take it. Another one, fun one I use when I'm not the hiring, you talked about when you're the hiring manager. My favorite one when I'm not the hiring manager is, in your own words, describe the role you're interviewing for. And a lot of people will take themselves out by blathering on too long or describing a role which is not the one that I envision and have aligned with the hiring manager that works for me. And so I think there's a lot of those, let's give them a little rope and see if they know how to use that rope.
I have a very similar question, actually. So one of the reasons why I say it's a minimum of an hour in that first meeting is there are 3 questions I always ask that can really sort of, that are always my go-to for executive hiring, right? The first one is to test self-awareness. So I actually use the analogy to say, imagine you and I hadn't met yet, right? But we were scheduled to meet tomorrow, right? And this evening I go to a drinks party, and it turns out at the drinks party, there's lots of people there that know you well, right? They went to college with you, they volunteered with you, they've worked with you, right? Their parents, right, where your kids go to school, right? There's a set of people there that know you well, and I end up having a set of conversations, right? What are the adjectives that would show up most frequently in that set of conversations, right? Like, what are the 4 adjectives? Imagine a word cloud collectively above all of that. Like, what are the 4 adjectives, right? Because I think it's helpful. There's no right answer, right? But like self-awareness, and it sort of warms them up a little bit, relaxes them a little bit. And then my second question is around sort of contextual or cultural awareness. And I say, look, unless you're super lucky, we have all probably worked in an organization where we were not a good fit with the culture, right? And there's, where you felt like you were, whatever the analogy you want to use, like wading through mud or swimming upstream, right? But just the values and the culture of the organization was not in sync with sort of how you thought and operated. And so if you go back and look at all the different environments you've been in, where were you the best version of yourself and where were you the worst version of yourself? And what was it about those environments, right? It's amazing the number of times that people are stumped by that question. And it's almost like they're thinking of themselves on an island, right? So they haven't sort of got enough awareness of their environment or the culture that they're operating in.
I like that. I always ask, where have you done your best work with no explanation? And I love to see where they go, but I'm missing the worst version part, which you can.
Yeah. And then the last question is the one that's very similar to yours, the one you mentioned of, in your own words, describe this role, which is, I say, hey, look, can you describe what your perfect role looks like and what are the characteristics, what are the criteria you're going to use to make a decision, right? Someone with your talent and experience is going to have multiple offers. So how are you going to actually explain to me your evaluation and your decision-making criteria, right? And then I flip that back and say, okay, well, presumably the reason why we're speaking is your current role somewhere falls short on these criteria, right? Can you tell me where it falls short, right? Now, sometimes they don't want to open up, right? But and if someone can't articulate their decision-making criteria, then I know we're very early in the process, right? They're just starting to think about this and they haven't put any critical thought. And then I'll use that then to guide and describe the role. And I'll go, okay, well, look, I think you articulated 4 criteria. I think 3 of them are a slam dunk and like no debate, but this one's probably the area where we should spend time. Right?
Love it. That's really perceptive. You're going to learn a lot from those open-ended questions.
Yeah.
I know we're about out of time, but I'd love to maybe wrap it with do you have any tactics on how you make senior hires successful? I'm betting you've thought a lot about that because you think so deeply about how you hire them too.
I do, and I tend to have sort of two rules which sound a little paradoxical for when I'm onboarding an exec, right? The first one, I think a mistake that I see execs make sometimes, right, and it to be avoided, is they come in too hard and too fast, and they don't listen and learn enough. So the first piece of advice I give is look, let's agree a period of time, right? Might be 30 days, might be 60 days, might be 90 days, but let's agree a period of time where all I'm asking from you is listening and learning, right? I want to see evidence of curiosity. I want to see evidence that you're learning the business, right? But I'm not asking you to come in and act, right? And execute, right? Because you won't have the context yet, right? What I want to see is you're ramping in your knowledge and your awareness, right? But I think sometimes the pressures come in and I've got a playbook and I'm going to impose my playbooks. Well, how do you know it's the right playbook, right? For this context, this situation. So that's
that you're doing that because there's other CEOs, in particular CEOs are in the, I need action immediately.
Yeah, I need action. If I haven't seen you, if you're a VP of marketing, you haven't driven leads up, 2x in the first month, where I'm going to fire you, sort of thing. It was
okay,
right.
on the Monday after you start, you were going to lead the metrics meeting. Right
Yeah.
here,
exactly.
start making sense. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the first rule, right? And it just gets them to relax a little bit, but it really emphasizes curiosity and learning the business, right? The second thing, and the reason I say this is paradoxical, is I put a lot of thought into what is the first sort of project or initiative that I want to give them that is a right balance of it's in their wheelhouse, right? I know they've got this, but it's going to actually force them to interact with a number of key functions and give them a purpose initially, right? And so that balancing act of it's meaty enough, right? But it's in their wheelhouse and it's going to, it's really going to drive. So I'll give an example for our current VP of revenue marketing that I brought in, right? So put a lot of thought into what that project should be. As I said, we have these 3 deployment types. And one of the middle deployment types is dedicated, right? Where it's on the cloud, but it's sort of single tenant and we're isolating some instances. So it's a high level of security and privacy for customers. And one of the projects I would go is hey, we want to actually go run trials for our second product, Weave, for our models customers on dedicated that is behind the firewall, and actually go run that as a marketing program, right? So it's sort of in his wheelhouse because it's a marketing program, but it's got a whole bunch of technology questions, legal questions, economics, right? Finance. It's okay, I'm going to give you ownership of this, right? And it's not so daunting, but it's well scoped okay. So you have got to focus, right, in the first 30, 60, sort of 90 days as well. So I'm always trying to think about what is that first project initiative that is the right balance, right? The Goldilocks size, so to speak.
I love that. You are one of the most thoughtful people I've met, and we've interviewed some amazing people on this podcast around how to hire, and I'm excited to share these wisdom with people. I mean, thank you so much, Robin, for the time.
Andy, a real pleasure. Great to connect and great to have the conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.